Miami is up, Florida State is way down, and I still don't know what to think about my stinking Tar Heels. Huddle up.
You don't want none! You don't want none!
Ready, break! What's going on, ACC football family? It is your favorite North Carolinian, Russ the Tar Heel. And in this huddle, baby, we're going to talk about the Week 2 ACC football slate. We're going to break down some games, and we're going to make some predictions. Now, to date, my win-loss record heading into the week is 15-3, which is good for an .833 winning percentage straight up on the season. So let's start this thing off by taking a look at the updated ACC football standings heading into Week 2. We've got number 23 Georgia Tech and Boston College at the top, who are both 1-0 in the conference. SMU is 2-0 overall, having played no conference games to this point. Number 12 Miami, number 22 Louisville, number 24 NC State, Cal, Puke, North Carolina, Pitt, Syracuse, Virginia, and Wake Forest are all 1-0 with no conference games to date. And then you got number 25 Clemson, Stanford, and Virginia Tech, who are 0-1 out of conference. And then there's the Florida State Seminoles, who are 0-2. And both of those L's are conference losses. Yikes. This Florida State team has completely dropped the ball this year after falling to Boston College on Monday night, 28-13. And they looked absolutely listless. That's the best way to describe it. No identity, no camaraderie, like barely any energy, man. I'm seriously disappointed in this football team. All year, all we've heard about is how much this team enjoys playing for Mike Norvell, and they have started the season 0-2. I feel like FSU is going through the same kind of scenario that the 2021 North Carolina team went through when they were preseason top 10 and they finished the season 6-7 with a bowl loss. And DJU, like I've been saying, is 100% not the guy. Yes, his receivers dropped some passes, but that dude missed some guys wide open multiple times. Big guy, really good arm, not a quarterback. I tell people all the time, man, size is great, arm strength is great, but those two things do not make you a quarterback. And I've been screaming this since the 2022 ACC Championship game, where the Heels would have probably won that stinking thing had Cade Klubnik not been introduced into the football game for DJ. Damn you, Dabo. Is this a 500 season for the Noles? Can they somehow get this thing fixed? I know Seminole Nation has got to be off their rocker livid at the start of this season, man. Offense is trash, and the highly anticipated defense is far from coming close to meeting any type of expectations coming into the season. And as a spectator, I think it's fascinating. I picked Florida State to beat Boston College. I completely overestimated this football team, which dropped my Week 1 record to, like I said, 15-3. My Week 1 record was 13-3. Overall, I'm 15-3, straight up on the season. But now that we've gotten that garbage out of the way, man, let's go ahead and get into this week's picks. And we'll start with the Friday night games, man. BYU at SMU and Duke at Northwestern. Now, BYU is coming off a season-opening win over the Southern Illinois Salukis, 41-13, where junior Jake Retzlaff went 20 for 30 for 348 yards and 3 touchdowns. LJ Martin averaged 5.2 yards per carry with a touch and 13 carries for 67 yards, and junior wide receiver Chase Roberts went over 100 yards receiving. SMU just got finished beating up on Houston Christian 59-7 after surviving out there in Nevada the week prior. Kevin Jennings actually received most of the action against HCU, going 10 for 14 for 148 yards and a touchdown. while Preston Stone, the starter in the first game, went 6 for 9 for 78 yards and 2 touchdowns. Rashard Smith rushed for 108 yards on 9 carries with 2 touchdowns himself, and SMU had 3 different receivers with a receiving touchdown. Now, SMU may have hit a stride here after this, game that they had with HCU, and it should be another decent test for the Mustangs before they get into ACC play, into a rude awakening, if you will. SMU is currently an 11-point favorite at home, and the ESPN matchup indicator gives SMU a 79% chance of beating BYU. SMU gets the job done against the Fighting Mormons, 38-24. Up next, Duke at Northwestern. Manny Diaz takes his show on the road out there to Illinois as they take on the Northwestern Wildcats in the Nerd Bowl. Malik Murphy and Puke are coming off of a 26-3 win against Elon, where Murphy almost threw for 300 yards and 2 touchdowns, but the defense really shut down the Elon Phoenix. On the other side, the Wildcats beat the Miami Redhawks 13-6, which tends to make me think that this is going to be some kind of defensive battle. I think that this Northwestern defense is really good, and I still personally have my reservations about the Duke frontline defense. But I think Malik Murphy is better than Mike Wright. Northwestern is currently a 2.5-point favorite, and the ESPN matchup indicator gives the Wildcats a 54.3% chance at beating the Devils. I'm going to go against the grain in this one and put aside my hatred for Puke. I think Puke gets it done in a defensive battle. I'm going to take the Blue Devils 20-13, but go Cats. Moving on next, we have an ACC battle between the Yellow Jackets of Atlanta and the Oranges, or something like that, of Syracuse. Now, this is a really compelling football game, and you guys that have been listening to me this year know that I'm kind of high on the potential of this Georgia Tech football team. They took care of business against FSU out in Ireland, which is looking less impressive as the days go by. And then they handled their crosstown foes, Georgia State, 35-12. Haynes King is an above-average quarterback with athletes all around him, and I'm a big fan of Jamal Haynes at the backfield and Singleton and Rutherford on the outside, especially behind that big offensive line, man. For the Qs, Ohio State transfer quarterback Kyle McCord is coming off of a huge 354 yards and 4 touchdown performance against Ohio. So Syracuse looks like they've definitely found their quarterback of the future. Here's going to be the deciding factor, though. Anthony Tyus III from Ohio, not Ohio State, Ohio, was able to hang 203 yards on the ground with 2 touchdowns, 12.7 yards per carry on that Syracuse defense. As a defense, they allowed 255 yards rushing on the ground, 6.5 yards per carry. Now that Georgia Tech offensive line is huge, and I have no doubt that they'll be able to lean on that Syracuse defensive line and move the football on the ground. Georgia Tech is currently 3-point favorites over the Qs out there in Syracuse, and the ESPN matchup indicator gives the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets a 62.4% chance at beating the Orange. I'm going to take the Jackets in this one 30-21 to get it done. Next up, we got Pitt at Cincinnati. Pitt seems to have found their quarterback in Eli Holstein, who completed 75% of his passes for 333 yards, 3 touchdowns to only 1 interception against Kent State last week. Now, Pat Narduzzi will take that show on the road down the street to Cincinnati to see if they can duplicate that performance against the Bearcats of Cincy. He looked comfortable in a 55-24 win against the Kent State Golden Flashes in week 1. So you would imagine that Eli Holstein is ready to go for round 2. Now, Cincinnati is coming off of a 38-20 win against Towson, in which sophomore Brendan Sorsby threw for 383 yards and 2 touchdowns. The Bearcats put up 638 yards of total offense, which is a ton, but they also allowed 438 to Towson themselves. That's an interesting component to my selection. Pitt's currently a 2-point favorite at the time of this prediction video, and the ESPN matchup indicator gives them a 56.9% chance of beating the Bearcats. Could be a bit of a shootout, but I like Pitt on the road at Cincinnati. Give me Pitt 42, Cincinnati 35. Next up, we got Cal at Auburn. Cal's coming off that 31-13 victory over UC Davis in their opener. This seen Fernando Mendoza only throw for 158 yards and a touchdown. The preseason All-ACC running back Jaden Ott only rushed for 49 yards on 14 carries, despite scoring 2 touchdowns on the ground. That's only a 3.5 yard per carry average against UC Davis. Now Auburn is coming off of a demolition of Alabama A&M, 73-3, where Peyton Thorne threw for 4 touchdowns and 322 yards, going 13 for 21 in the ball game. Cal's going to be tougher than Alabama A&M, but I think Auburn beats the brakes off of them down there. It's going to be a long day for that Cal offense, as they will have a hard time moving that Auburn DL for Jaden Ott. If you can't run the football at home against UC Davis, you ain't running the football on the road at Auburn. Auburn's currently a 13-point favorite, and the ESPN matchup indicator gives Auburn an 81.6% chance of beating Cal. I like Auburn in this one to take care of business. I'll take Auburn plus the points, 31-17. Next we have Duquesne at Boston College. Duquesne is coming off of a season-opening blowout loss at Toledo, 49-10, where they struggled to move the football with only 284 yards of total offense. It doesn't get much easier as the Dukes head to Boston to take on the Golden Eagles, who are coming off of a huge victory down in Tallahassee against the number 10 Florida State Seminoles. They're not number 10 anymore. Matter of fact, they're not even stinking ranked. Thomas Castellanos threw for 106 yards and 2 touchdowns, and the BC offense seemed to be one step ahead of that Seminole defense the entire night. Now, Thomas Castellanos and the BC Eagles, they won't have any issues in this one. ESPN matchup indicator gives them a 99% chance to win. Make it 100. I like BC big, 52-7. Next, Jacksonville State at the Louisville Cardinal. The Gamecocks were mauled at the hands of Coastal Carolina to start the season, 55-27. They gave up 552 yards of total offense to the Chanticleers, and that's bad news for a team that's going up against a Louisville team that hung 62 on Austin Peay. And they gave up nothing. Tyler Shaw threw for 232 yards and 4 touchdowns in his debut with the Cards. Louisville big in this one at home, 56-17. Next up, we got my boys, the North Carolina Tar Heels, taking on the Charlotte 49ers in Carolina's home opener. Now, Charlotte dropped their home opener to James Madison 30-7, and now they get to visit Chapel Hill to take on the Heels for the first time in each program's history. Charlotte only put up 324 yards of offense against JMU, and they gave up almost 198 to be exact on the ground. That bodes well for a North Carolina team that features All-American running back Omarion Hampton behind a humongous offensive line. The real question is, now that Max Johnson is gone for the season, how will UNC's offense look after a few extra days to prepare redshirt sophomore Conner Harrell? I have a feeling that we're going to see a much more explosive offense than against the Gophers, and it'll be much needed game repetitions for Conner. Make sure you check out my full game preview up top. The ESPN matchup indicator gives UNC a 91.3% chance of beating Charlotte, and they are currently 22-point favorites at the time of this video. Give me North Carolina 38, Charlotte 13. Next up, we got Marshall at Virginia Tech. Marshall won convincingly in their tune-up game against Stony Brook. Next up, we got Marshall against Virginia Tech. Now, Marshall is coming off of a convincing victory over Stony Brook, 45-3, in which they were clearly the better football team. Marshall was able to play 3 quarterbacks in that game. but it looks like the guy that they're going to roll with is Braylon Braxton, who went 7 for 11, 141 yards and 2 touchdowns. The Thundering Herd also rushed for 259 yards against Stony Brook. The Virginia Tech Hokies, on the other hand, are coming off an overtime loss to Vanderbilt, 34-27, after faltering down the stretch. Kyron Jones threw for 322 yards and 2 touchdowns, but he was unable to finish the football game. Not to mention the Hokies' vaunted defense gave up 181 yards rushing on the ground. Virginia Tech is currently a 19.5-point favorite, and the ESPN matchup indicator gives them a 60.2% chance of winning this football game. Virginia Tech will win this football game, but it's going to be a little bit closer than the experts think. Virginia Tech 34, Marshall 24. Next up, we got Florida A&M at number 12 Miami. Now, FAMU is 2-0 on the season, and they've won by 1 point to Norfolk State and 4 points to South Carolina State. Miami just came off of a beatdown of Florida in the Swamp, 41-17, and looked like the best team in the Atlantic Coast Conference in Week 1. This game is going to be a massacre in front of the fans at Hard Rock. Miami 55, FAMU 7, and those 7 points happen when the backups come in, probably the third string guys. Next up, we got Cal Poly at Stanford. Now, Cal Poly lost at South Dakota 27-21 in their season opener, where Bo Kelly threw for 226 yards and a touchdown, but also threw 3 interceptions. They were only able to muster 294 yards of total offense against South Dakota. Eek! Stanford, on the other hand, played TCU tough at home. Ashton Daniels threw for 163 yards, 1 touchdown and 1 pick. And he also led the team in rushing with 87 yards on 17 carries. Now, Stanford, they're going to have to play perfect ball all season long if they're going to get some W's against anybody that they play. But I think they get this one done. The Cardinal win closer than what it should be, 35-24. Next up, we got a little matchup, one of 2 ACC matchups. In Week 2, Virginia is going to head on down to Winston-Salem to take on the Deacs. Both of these teams finished toward the bottom of the ACC last year, and they're looking for a bounce-back campaign. Now, UVA is coming off of a 34-13 home win against Richmond that saw newly coined starting quarterback Anthony Calandria show why he was chosen to be the guy. He threw for 297 yards and 2 touchdowns and was extremely efficient by going 17 for 23 passing in the game. Senior Kobe Pace had 93 yards rushing and a touchdown on the ground, and Malachi Fields was in triple digits receiving. On the other side of the football, Hank Backmeyer stepped in as QB1 for the Deacs and threw for 263 yards and 3 touchdowns himself. Damon Claiborne rushed for 135 yards and a touchdown on 17 carries, and senior wide receiver Taylor Marin had a hundo receiving on 6 catches. The ESPN matchup indicator gives the Wake Forest Demon Deacons a 65.9% chance of winning this football game, and they are currently 2-point favorites. I think these teams are as evenly matched as is possible. So there's going to have to be some kind of X factor that we look to in this football game, and I think Dave Clawson is the X factor. He's a better football coach than Tony Elliott, and that's really what it boils down to, not to mention the game is in Wake Forest. I'm going to take Wake Forest in this one, in a close one, 34-31. And now we got arguably the marquee game in the ACC this week. Number 4 Tennessee taking on number 24 NC State out in Charlotte. Now this is the game that I'm actually really looking forward to watching. State's coming off of a 38-21 victory over Western Carolina at home, in which it took a dominant fourth quarter to escape the grasp of the Catamounts. Grayson McCall threw an early interception, but rebounded to go 26 for 40 for the game, 318 yards and 3 touchdowns. Jordan Waters had 123 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns himself. And KC Concepcion was highly featured in this football game like you would expect. He had a ridiculous ball game, 121 yards receiving and 3 touchdowns on 9 receptions. Freshman Nico Iamaleava showed why he was the number 2 rated player in his football class by opening the season for the Vols, going 22 for 28 for 314 yards and 3 touchdowns in a 69-3 whooping against Chattanooga. Junior running back Dylan Sampson had 124 yards on 12 carries and 3 touchdowns, and senior Dante Thornton Jr. had 3 receptions for 105 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's 35 yards a reception. Now, in my honest opinion, I think State is a decent football team, but Tennessee is going to be the best team that they play this year by far. I expect both teams to travel fairly well. Should be a packed house divided right down the stinking middle. Now, here's the interesting thing. The ESPN matchup indicator has Tennessee as an 87.9% chance at beating Wuffie. You talk about having no confidence in the other stinking team. And they're currently 8-point favorites on this game, up from an opening 4 points. So the needle is moving away from NC State. I actually think this one could get a little out of hand. And I'm going to take Tennessee over to the Wolfsack, 34-21. Maybe State scores a late touchdown or something like that to make it a little bit closer than what the game actually is. I don't care who you're playing either, Wuffie. You take an L, and I will be making a video. And the last game of week 2 is also an interesting matchup. The Mountaineers of App State head on down to number 25 Clemson to take on the Tigers in the last ACC game of the week. Joey Aguilar for App State picked up right where he left off last year in 2023 by starting the season with a 326-yard passing night and 2 touchdowns and a 38-10 convincing victory over East Tennessee State. Senior wide receiver Clayton Robinson had 103 yards receiving on 8 receptions, and we all know that App State lives for these football games, and they'll be super excited at the opportunity to do what they do. They push P4 teams to the brink, and occasionally they make them submit. Now, Clemson is coming off of a 34-3 whooping at the hands of the best team in the country out in Atlanta. I understand that Tiger fans are frustrated with the direction of the football program under Dabo Swinney, but I'm not really sure why they actually expected to even compete long-term in that Clemson-Georgia football game. It was 6-0 at the half. That's kind of a win, at least a mental win, if you will. Now, Cade Klubnik struggled to get anything going against that vaunted Georgia defense by throwing for only 142 yards and an interception. What was interesting was the fact that Phil Maffa didn't even get 20 carries. He only got 16 to be exact, and only was able to muster 59 yards on the ground, which that does not surprise me. This is definitely not an easy follow-up game after that Georgia game, man. Not a cupcake in the slightest. And it would completely blow my stinking mind if Clemson and Florida State started the season 0-2. The two teams that were most pressing to get out of the ACC, man, that would be wild. We'll have to visit that after this stinking game. Anyway, ESPN matchup indicator gives the Clemson Tigers an 81.6% chance at beating the Mountaineers in Death Valley, and they are currently 17.5-point favorites at the time of this video. I think Clemson gets it done, but I don't think they cover. The game is close for a little while, and Clemson gets the W 35-24. And that'll about wrap it up, man, for my Week 2 picks. So you let me know down in the comment section, ACC football family, is your team on the cusp of upsetting somebody? Are people sleeping on your guys? Or are you guys on upset alert? I want honest dialogue down here in the comment section, and we'll hash it out in the next one. We'll catch you on the next one, baby.